March 1987, Tennessee. On a lonely stretch of Interstate 40, truckers rumbled by, their headlights piercing the fading afternoon. The roar of engines came and went, swallowed by the emptiness of the open road. Beyond the guardrail, where the brush grew thick and untamed, silence lingered. And in that silence, something unspeakable waited to be found. The body of a young woman. Alone. Abandoned. No identification, no belongings. Only a faint reddish tint in her hair, and the cruel mystery of who she was, and why she had been left there. For investigators, it was a haunting discovery. For the woman, it was the beginning of a long erasure. Stripped of her name, she was reduced to a label, Jane Doe. And for the public, it was one more chilling reminder that something sinister was happening along America's highways. You're watching the Cold Case Archive, where we reopen the files of the forgotten, victims silenced by time but never erased. Subscribe now and join us as we uncover the mysteries left behind and the breakthroughs that finally bring names back to the nameless. The call came into the Tennessee Sheriff's Office late in the afternoon. Sheriff Randall Hayes remembered the moment clearly for the rest of his career. A body had been spotted just off the highway shoulder. No car. No suitcase. No clear sign of how she had arrived there. Hayes and his deputies hurried to the scene, their patrol lights flashing against the long stretch of interstate. When they stepped beyond the guardrail into the brush, they were met with silence and a terrible stillness. The woman appeared to be in her mid-20s. She was dressed casually with no jewelry, no purse, no driver's license. Hayes later admitted to the press that it was one of the most frustrating starts to a case he had ever faced. "Usually you start with a name," he said. "Here we didn't even have that." Imagine being in that position. A crime scene, a victim, but no identity. How do you begin to investigate a murder when you don't even know who the victim is? The Tennessee State Medical Examiner's office was called in. They estimated she had been dead for several days. The cause of death suggested foul play, though details were not released to the public. For Hayes, that meant he wasn't just dealing with a lost person. He was dealing with a homicide, and possibly the latest in a disturbing pattern. Because by 1987, whispers had already spread among law enforcement. Women, often with auburn or reddish hair, were turning up dead along highways in the South. Some in Kentucky, some in Arkansas, some in West Virginia, and now Tennessee. The press had already coined a name for the mystery, the Redhead Murders. And Hayes couldn't shake the thought, was this young woman one of them? News traveled quickly. Local reporter Clara Simmons covered the case in stark detail. The woman was found with no identification, no belongings, and no immediate connection to anyone in the region. A life erased before it could even be written down. That phrase, a life erased, captured the public's attention. The idea that someone could vanish so completely that no one came forward to claim her, unsettled the community. Sheriff Hayes held press conferences sharing what little they knew. He distributed a composite sketch drawn from forensic artists. He sent fingerprints to state and federal agencies. He contacted nearby counties to compare dental records. But without a name, every path ended in a dead end. Think about that frustration. Investigators can collect evidence, run tests, and interview witnesses. But without knowing who the victim is, the investigation has no anchor. Where do you look? Who do you talk to? How do you trace the last steps of a life you cannot name? Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Pennsylvania, the Green family lived through their own uncertainty. Christine Green was the youngest daughter of Evelyn Green. She was 25, full of restless energy, always chasing new opportunities. She had a way of laughing that filled a room, and her sister Monica used to say you could hear Christine coming before you saw her. But in the weeks leading up to March 1987, Christine had stopped calling. Letters went unanswered. The visits that Evelyn looked forward to never came. Evelyn sat by the kitchen phone many evenings waiting for it to ring. Monica, younger but more restless, brushed it off at first. Christine had always been independent after all. But silence has a way of stretching. Days became weeks. And while the Green family waited for Christine to resurface, they had no idea that she had already been found, in Tennessee, lying nameless in a morgue. That cruel disconnect would last decades. Back in Tennessee, investigators searched for leads. Sheriff Hayes organized roadblocks, stopping cars and trucks along I-40, asking drivers if they had seen anything unusual. Most shook their heads. One trucker, Harold Denton, thought he remembered seeing a young woman near a gas station a few days earlier, but he wasn't certain. No solid witnesses. No ID. No missing person reports that matched. And then the trail went cold. By summer 1987, Hayes admitted publicly that his team had run out of immediate options. "We can't chase shadows," he said. "Without her name, we're building a house without a foundation." And so the young woman was buried in a Tennessee cemetery under a simple marker. Unknown female, March 1987. Pause for a moment and let that image settle. A 25-year-old woman, buried without her name. Her family hundreds of miles away waiting for a phone call that would never come. Her grave marked only by the word unknown. How many people drove past that cemetery over the years, never realizing the tragedy lying beneath the soil? How many investigators reopened the file, only to set it aside again, defeated by the lack of leads? And how many families across the country, mothers, sisters, cousins searching for missing loved ones, never knew that one of them was buried under that marker? This is the true cruelty of Jane Doe cases. A person dies twice, once when their life is taken and again when their identity is erased. For Christine Green, that erasure would last 31 years. She would lie in that grave as unknown female, her story silenced until science caught up with the mystery. DNA would become the key that human memory and old methods could not provide. And decades later, Christine's name would finally be spoken again. But before we reach that breakthrough, we must step back into the broader mystery, the Redhead Murders themselves. Because Christine's case was never just about one woman on the side of a Tennessee highway. It was about a string of victims, scattered across multiple states, bound together by hair color, geography, and silence. And the chilling question that haunted every investigator, was there one killer behind them all? By the mid-1980s, a troubling pattern was beginning to take shape along the highways of the American South. Bodies of women were being discovered in ditches, in brush along overpasses, and on the edges of lonely rest stops. Different states, different counties, different investigating agencies. Yet the similarities were undeniable. Most of the victims were young. Many had hair that carried a reddish or auburn tint. And nearly all were left near highways, abandoned like discarded luggage, as though someone had been moving quickly and wanted the past erased as fast as possible. The press gave it a name, the Redhead Murders. It was a phrase that stuck. Newspapers in Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Arkansas splashed the term across their front pages. Television anchors spoke it with a mix of dread and intrigue. And communities, already wary of the dangers of hitchhiking and roadside encounters, were plunged into a deeper unease. Who was killing these women? Was there a single predator roaming the highways, selecting victims at random? Or was it coincidence, scattered crimes that only looked connected from a distance? Law enforcement didn't have easy answers. In the 1980s, most departments worked within their own borders. Information traveled slowly. Databases that exist today, fingerprint repositories, DNA indexing systems, interagency crime link software, were still years away. Detectives in Tennessee might suspect a connection to Kentucky, but confirming it required endless phone calls, mailed reports, and a willingness from another department to share details. Even then, linking murders across state lines was a near impossibility. By 1985, investigators had at least half a dozen cases that seemed eerily similar. Young women, highway dump sites, reddish hair, each unsolved. Each leaving families devastated and investigators chasing shadows. The FBI was eventually consulted, but even federal oversight didn't provide clarity. Were these murders the work of one individual, a serial killer who prowled America's roadways? Or were they multiple predators, targeting vulnerable women in similar ways? The uncertainty itself was terrifying. When Christine Green's body was discovered in March of 1987, her case slid almost seamlessly into this grim pattern. A young woman, reddish hair, abandoned near a Tennessee highway. Sheriff Randall Hayes had little choice but to consider that his Jane Doe, the woman he had buried without a name, might be the latest in the string of Redhead murders. For Hayes, it was a thought that carried weight. He wasn't just responsible for an unsolved homicide in his county. He might be holding a piece of a much larger, darker puzzle that stretched across the South. Late at night, sitting in his small office, Hayes would spread out photocopied reports and grainy photographs mailed to him from other jurisdictions. He'd trace highway routes with a pen, circle towns where other bodies had been found. The names blurred together. The faces in the photographs looked eerily alike. In a rare interview years later, he admitted, "I'd sit there staring at those files and I couldn't tell if we were chasing the same man or chasing ghosts. That uncertainty, it'll keep you up at night." The climate of fear spread quickly through communities. Truck stops became places of quiet suspicion. Parents warned their daughters not to hitch rides, not to linger on highways, not to travel alone at night. Reporters like Clara Simmons captured the unease in words that resonated beyond their immediate readership. In one 1986 column she wrote, "Highways are meant to connect us, but for these women they have become places of disappearance. The road has turned into a hunting ground." That line stuck. It painted highways, once symbols of freedom and opportunity, as corridors of danger. For women traveling alone, every glance from a stranger at a rest stop felt heavier. For families, every phone call that went unanswered stirred dread. The murders were no longer just crimes. They had become a narrative of fear that reshaped how people thought about travel, safety, and vulnerability. Christine Green's case was swept into that current. She wasn't the only Jane Doe tied to the Redhead murders, but her anonymity made her story even harder to resolve. Sheriff Hayes knew that without a name, she would remain another unsolved line in a growing file. Another unknown. Another faceless victim. But in Pennsylvania, the Green family was already feeling the weight of her absence. Her mother, Evelyn, sat by the kitchen window most nights, the cordless phone placed beside her. She'd listen to the hum of cicadas outside and tell herself the phone could ring at any moment. Maybe Christine would be calling. Maybe she had simply gone traveling, maybe she needed time. Evelyn would rehearse what she would say if the call came. "Christine, we've been worried. Just tell us you're safe." Her sister Monica tried to rationalize it differently. She'd tell herself that Christine's laugh, loud and infectious, was too strong to simply vanish. That kind of joy didn't just disappear. But as weeks turned into months, even Monica struggled to hold on to that belief. Her cousin Janelle, younger than both sisters, later admitted that she felt it before anyone said it aloud. Christine wasn't coming home. The family's quiet, aching grief stood in painful contrast to the reality in Tennessee, where Christine lay buried under a marker that read only "unknown female." What do you think? Was there truly one predator behind the Redhead murders? Or were investigators grasping for patterns in a time before forensic science could provide clear answers? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if this story grips you, consider subscribing so you don't miss future episodes of the Cold Case Archive. As the years passed, the Redhead murders faded from front pages. Other crimes filled the headlines. The urgency lessened. But for investigators like Hayes, the memory never left. Every time he drove I-40, every time he passed a lonely stretch of roadside brush, he thought of the woman his county had buried without a name. Christine Green. At least that's who we now know she was. For him, she would remain forever Jane Doe, a case unsolved, a victim unclaimed. The Redhead murders as a whole remain one of the most puzzling clusters of unsolved cases in American history. Some victims were eventually identified, some families reunited with answers, however tragic. Others were not so fortunate. And Christine, for 3 decades, was caught in that limbo. Not forgotten by her family in Pennsylvania, but also not recognized as their missing daughter, sister, cousin. It's a reminder of how vulnerable so many victims were during that time. Not just to the violence that claimed their lives, but to the era's investigative shortcomings. With no DNA testing, no surveillance cameras, no digital fingerprints, a killer on the highways could move in near anonymity, leaving behind bodies that might never be named. For families like the Greens, that meant living with silence. Endless silence. But here's where we shift. Because Christine Green was not just a victim. Not just another possible Redhead murders case. She was a person. Before she was a Jane Doe lying by a Tennessee highway, she was a young woman with a life, a family, and a story of her own. To understand what was lost that day in 1987, we need to step away from the crime scene. Away from the headlines. Away from the context of a serial pattern. We need to remember Christine Green as she truly was. Before she was reduced to the haunting label of Jane Doe, Christine Green was a young woman living in Pennsylvania, navigating the same everyday hopes and struggles that shaped countless lives in the 1980s. She was born into a working-class family. Her mother, Evelyn Green, spent long shifts at a textile plant, her hands calloused from endless work. Christine's father had drifted away when the girls were still young, leaving Evelyn to raise Christine and her younger sister Monica, with occasional help from extended family, like their cousin Janelle. Christine was the quieter of the sisters, though not shy. She had a calm presence, thoughtful and measured, preferring to listen before she spoke. Monica, by contrast, was outspoken, quick to challenge anyone. The balance between them gave the sisters their rhythm: fire and water, sharp edges and soft corners. Friends remembered Christine as the person you went to when you needed someone to hear you out. She had that gift, the ability to make others feel understood, even when she didn't say much at all. And when she laughed, the sound was unmistakable. A bright, sudden laugh that filled the room and pulled others into its orbit. Years later, Monica would still hear it in her memory, sharp as a bell, as if Christine were still standing right beside her. Growing up in Pennsylvania in the mid-1980s, Christine's world was shaped by both opportunity and limitation. She loved to draw, sketching faces in her notebooks during class. Her teachers described her as artistic, someone who might one day find her place in fashion or design. She spoke often of wanting to study cosmetology, maybe open a salon of her own. But the reality was harder. Jobs were scarce. Factories were closing. For a young black woman with little financial support, dreams often had to be weighed against survival. Christine took babysitting jobs, waitressing shifts, and worked part-time in a corner store when she could. Anything to bring in a little money. Evelyn, ever practical, urged her daughter to think of stability, something steady, something safe. Christine wanted more. She wasn't reckless, but she was restless. She wanted to carve out her own path. Christine's world was filled with small adventures. She loved taking the city bus just to see where it would go, exploring neighborhoods far from her own. She would spend afternoons walking along streets lined with record shops, department stores, and movie theaters, gazing into windows at the things she couldn't yet afford. She followed fashion trends of the decade: patterned sweaters, hoop earrings, bright scarves. When she had a little extra money, she'd buy a new shade of nail polish, something bold like neon pink or deep crimson. She adored music, humming along to Whitney Houston on the radio, sometimes singing softly while she did chores. Evelyn would later recall hearing her daughter's voice echoing through the narrow apartment, carrying over the sound of pots clattering in the kitchen. Christine lived for those moments, small bursts of freedom, color, and expression in a life otherwise hemmed in by limitations. But the world outside wasn't always safe. In the 1980s, highways had become both pathways to adventure and corridors of danger. Hitchhiking was still common, especially for young women without steady income or cars of their own. It was seen as a way to travel cheap, to chase opportunity. But stories were growing darker. Newspapers ran headlines of missing women, unidentified bodies, and rumors of predators who prowled the highways. Christine knew the risks. Everyone did. But like many her age, she carried a belief that trouble happened to other people. That she could trust her instincts, read people well enough, and avoid danger when it came close. Her mother worried about this. Evelyn recalled nights spent sitting near the window, waiting for Christine to come home, telling herself not to panic. But deep down, she knew her daughter's adventurous spirit could put her in harm's way. Family ties kept Christine grounded. Monica, though quick to argue, loved her sister fiercely. The two bickered over chores, curfews, and boys, but beneath it all was loyalty. They were each other's constants. Monica often described Christine as her other half, the person she imagined growing old with, side by side. Janelle, younger and impressionable, copied Christine's style. She would sit on the edge of Christine's bed, watching her paint her nails or tie her hair in a colorful scarf, memorizing every detail. Christine represented possibility to her, proof that there was more out there than the narrow streets of their Pennsylvania neighborhood. And Evelyn, for all her worries, treasured her daughter's presence. She once described Christine as sunlight in motion. One of her strongest memories was of Christine standing in the bathroom mirror, a curling iron in hand, humming along to Whitney Houston's Greatest Love of All on the radio, filling the house with warmth. Evelyn remembered pausing in the hallway, just to watch her daughter in that simple, ordinary joy. It was a memory she would cling to in the years of silence that followed. Christine's laughter, her style, her dreams, these were real. She wasn't just a name in a file or a face on a missing person poster. She was someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's cousin. And her story deserves to be remembered. Christine's name was lost once, buried under decades of silence. Together we can make sure that never happens again. If you're with us in keeping her memory alive, please like and share this video. The months leading up to Christine's disappearance carried an unsettling shift. She began spending more time away from home. Sometimes she didn't come back until late. Sometimes she disappeared for a day or two, saying little about where she had been. Evelyn pressed her, but Christine brushed off the concern, saying she was just living. There were rumors that Christine had fallen in with people who drifted from town to town, acquaintances who promised excitement but rarely delivered stability. Whether these connections were harmless or dangerous, her family never fully knew. Monica later remembered one summer evening, sitting with Christine on the porch. Fireflies flickered in the humid air as Christine spoke about wanting to see more, to get out for a while. Monica had teased her, saying, "You think the world's better out there? You'll just find more bills and headaches." Christine laughed, bright and free. "Maybe. But I want to find out for myself." That restless spirit, the one that made her vibrant and curious, was also the part that made her vulnerable. And while Christine and her family could not have known it, the highways of the South were already gaining a reputation in law enforcement circles. Women were disappearing. Some were found dead along rural stretches of road. There were whispers of a pattern, an unknown predator targeting women, many of them red-haired, many of them young and transient. Years later, investigators would call it the Redhead Murders. Christine Green, though far from Tennessee at the time, was already walking a path that placed her on a dangerous collision course. Her family would spend decades wondering what happened to her. For them, the last memories were frozen in time. The sound of her laughter, the sight of her painting her nails in the mirror, the promise of her saying she wanted to see more of the world. What they didn't know was that in 1987, Christine's life would be violently cut short along a Tennessee highway, her identity lost, her story buried. And so, before the silence, before the decades of questions, we must remember her as she truly was. A young woman with laughter, ambition, and hope. Those memories of Christine, her laughter, her ambitions, her longing to see the world, would become the last her family ever carried. Because not long after, she would disappear without a trace, beginning a mystery that would take more than 3 decades to unravel. It was the summer of 1987. Christine was 25 years old, restless, and standing at the edge of independence. She had spoken often about wanting more than her quiet corner of Pennsylvania could give her. She dreamed of traveling south, finding new work, new opportunities, maybe even a new life. Her family remembered the days leading up to her absence in fragments. A suitcase packed hurriedly. Conversations about bus tickets. Christine mentioning, almost in passing, that she might head toward Tennessee. It wasn't unusual for her to make sudden plans. She had always been independent, headstrong, unafraid of new places. But then came the silence. Evelyn, her mother, recalled one night vividly. She kept the porch light burning, expecting Christine to come back after visiting a friend. Hours stretched into dawn, and the bulb glowed against the empty street. Evelyn never turned that light off in her heart. It became her quiet vigil, her way of holding space for a daughter who never walked through the door again. At first, the family thought maybe Christine had simply taken off on another adventure. Monica, her younger sister, tried to reassure their mother. "She'll call. She always calls." But the days piled into weeks and no call came. Christine's absence became a presence of its own, a heavy silence that filled the house. By late 1987, Evelyn filed a missing persons report in Pennsylvania. What the family never could have known was that Christine had already been found, more than 2 years earlier, in another state, her name erased, her body buried under the label of Jane Doe. March 1985, 2 years before Christine's family realized she was missing. In the rolling Appalachian foothills of Campbell County, Tennessee, another story was unfolding. It was a late winter morning when a trucker pulled off Interstate 75 near Jellicoe, a small town straddling the Kentucky border. The area was quiet, dotted with gas stations and truck stops catering to the steady hum of highway traffic. But that morning, what he found would haunt the county for decades. Lying just off the shoulder of the highway in a patch of brush and scattered leaves, was the body of a young woman. She was partially clothed, her hair striking reddish-brown, shoulder length. Her skin had already begun to change in the cold, making it difficult for investigators to determine her race. What they did know was chilling. She had been left there deliberately, discarded like she didn't matter, in a place where only chance brought her discovery. The Campbell County Sheriff's Office arrived quickly, cordoning off the scene. Deputies and Tennessee Bureau of Investigation agents combed the area for clues. They searched for tire tracks, for evidence of a struggle, for anything that could speak to who she was or what had happened to her. But the roadside offered little. Highways are transient places, thousands pass through, few linger. Whatever story the land might have told had already been washed away by rain and wind. An autopsy gave only partial answers. She was a young woman, likely in her 20s. She had been strangled. The condition of her remains suggested she had been there for several days, maybe longer. Beyond that, little could be said with certainty. She became a Jane Doe. And while her body was laid to rest in Tennessee soil, her family in Pennsylvania still believed she was alive somewhere, unaware that their missing daughter had already been found. In the records of Campbell County, she was simply listed as unidentified female, 1985. Investigators circulated sketches, reconstructed facial images, dental charts. They reached out to other states, asking if anyone had reported a missing woman matching her description. But no match came. Her reddish-brown hair made her case particularly haunting. Around the same time, law enforcement across the South was quietly comparing notes. Women, often with red or auburn hair, were being found murdered along highways in Kentucky, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Tennessee. The press would later call them the Redhead Murders. Some victims were identified, many were not. Anne Christine, though no one yet knew her name, was among them. For her family in Pennsylvania, life was filled with questions without answers. Evelyn filed reports, but they never crossed with Tennessee's Jane Doe file. Interstate communication was slow, fragmented, and often dependent on luck. Monica and Janelle, Christine's sisters, grew up carrying her absence as both wound and warning. "We'd set the table and still feel like her chair was there," Janelle once said. "It was like she was in the room, but we couldn't reach her." Evelyn, meanwhile, would sit by the phone long into the night. Every ring carried the hope that it was Christine. And every silence afterward was crushing. For Tennessee investigators, the Jane Doe case quickly grew cold. With no identity, no family to connect her to, the leads were scarce. Detectives speculated she might have been a hitchhiker, a woman caught in the orbit of long-haul trucking routes that carved through the state. Her case was one of many. The 1980s saw an alarming rise in cases of women found along highways, transients, runaways, sex workers, and those simply seeking new lives. Often they were marginalized, overlooked, their disappearances never fully investigated. In Campbell County, deputies could do little but file her case and hope someday someone would come forward. They buried her in a local cemetery, a simple headstone marking her as unknown. Beneath the soil lay Christine Green, her name erased, her story silenced. Back in Pennsylvania, the Green family lived with the ache of uncertainty. Evelyn's health began to suffer under the strain. Monica grew more protective of her own children, haunted by the possibility that people could vanish so easily. The family held gatherings where Christine's name was spoken in prayers. But as years turned into decades, her absence hardened into a kind of silence that families of the missing know all too well. "We never stopped looking," Evelyn said years later. "But after a while you stop saying it out loud. It hurts too much." What they didn't know was that Christine had never truly disappeared. She was there, in an unmarked grave in Tennessee, waiting for science to catch up, waiting for someone to connect the threads. By the late 1980s, whispers of a predator stalking southern highways had grown louder. Journalists began using the term Redhead Murders to describe the cluster of cases. Many of the victims, like Christine, were buried under the Jane Doe label. For law enforcement, connecting the dots was daunting. Each state kept its own records, many still on paper. There was no central DNA database. Cases slipped through cracks, families filed reports that never reached the right desk. And so Christine's case, like so many others, faded into cold storage. Cold Case Archive viewers, this is where your role becomes vital. Cases like Christine's were lost not because no one cared, but because the systems in place failed them. Today, when you share these stories, when you speak their names, you're part of the reason they're remembered. Christine Green's identity was buried for decades. Together, we can make sure it never disappears again. The 1990s came and went. Technology advanced, but Christine's file gathered dust. By the early 2000s, detectives who had worked the original investigation had retired. A new generation of officers inherited shelves of cold cases with little more than faded photographs and incomplete autopsy notes. For Evelyn, hope dimmed but never vanished. She kept Christine's belongings, a small box of trinkets, letters and photographs, tucked safely away. Each year on Christine's birthday, she lit a candle. Some years Monica and Janelle joined her. Some years the grief was too much to gather. The cruelest truth of all was that answers existed the entire time. Christine's body had been found before she was even reported missing. But because she was unidentified, her family remained locked in uncertainty, searching for someone who had already been buried. Her life had ended brutally, her name stripped away, her family left in limbo. The timeline never seemed to make sense. A body in Tennessee in 1985, a disappearance in Pennsylvania in 1987, and no one realizing they were the same woman. For decades, Christine Green was both missing and found, lost and discovered, hidden by the failure of systems meant to protect her. But time has a way of bringing even the coldest cases back into the light. Because more than 30 years later, Christine Green's story would no longer be written in silence. Through DNA breakthroughs, through relentless investigators, her name would rise again, giving her family the truth they had waited for, and linking her forever to the shadowy mystery of the Redhead Murders. The story could have ended there, another Jane Doe buried and forgotten. But 30 years later, a breakthrough would bring Christine's name back from the shadows, and with it, the key to unraveling one of the South's darkest mysteries. By the 2010s, Tennessee investigators were revisiting old files with new tools. Advances in forensic science had transformed what was once impossible. DNA analysis, nearly non-existent in the mid-1980s, had become the cornerstone of modern investigation. Among the cases pulled from storage was the file of an unidentified young woman found near Jellicoe in 1985. For decades she had been Jane Doe, faceless, nameless, a number in a ledger. But detectives in Campbell County knew the tide was shifting. If ever there was a time to restore her identity, it was now. In 2016, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation partnered with the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NamUs, to compare DNA from Jane Does with missing persons nationwide. Unmarked graves were exhumed, evidence retested, and profiles uploaded into national databases that had not existed when Christine's body was first discovered. For the Jane Doe of 1985, a DNA profile was finally generated. And that set the stage for the breakthrough. DNA was more than a sequence of letters on a chart. For families, it was proof, irrefutable, unchanging, a biological signature that could cut through decades of silence. Technicians swabbed bone samples, running them through advanced sequencing machines. The results were uploaded into CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, and cross-referenced with familial samples collected across the country. But the real revolution came with forensic genealogy. Genealogists began constructing family trees not from immediate relatives, but from distant cousins scattered across the country. With each new connection, the tree narrowed, branches converging, leaves falling into place, until one particular family line appeared in Pennsylvania. Christine's DNA was a puzzle piece waiting for its place. And after decades in the dark, it finally locked into position. In 2018, investigators announced what once seemed impossible. The Jane Doe found in Campbell County, Tennessee in 1985 was Christine Green. The confirmation reverberated like a shockwave through her family in Pennsylvania. After 31 years of questions, after decades of birthdays missed and holidays spent in quiet mourning, they finally knew where Christine had been all along. Her sisters, Monica and Janelle, described the moment as bittersweet. Monica remembered getting the phone call. At first I couldn't breathe. I thought, finally we have an answer. But then it hit me. She'd been gone all this time and we never knew. Janelle said quietly, people talk about closure but there's no such thing. It's just learning to carry the truth. At least now we can carry her name, not just a question mark. For Evelyn, Christine's mother, the news was both blessing and burden. She had passed away before the identification was made public, never learning the fate of her daughter. But the candle she lit year after year had not been in vain. Her prayers had kept Christine's memory alive long enough for science to bring her back to her family. Christine Green was no longer Jane Doe. Her name was restored. her story could be told. When the news broke, the Green family gathered in a quiet living room. Photographs of Christine spread across the table. They looked at her face in old snapshots. Christine with her bright smile, Christine singing along to Whitney Houston on the radio, Christine teasing her younger sisters. For the first time they could connect those memories to a place. They knew where Christine's body had been laid to rest. They knew her final chapter. But answers did not erase the pain. "We used to wonder if she was out there somewhere, maybe started a new life," Monica admitted. "Now we know. Now we know she never left us, not really. She was here all along, waiting for us to find her." Their grief became a form of remembrance, proof that even when systems fail, families do not forget. With Christine's identification, investigators began to look again at the larger pattern, the Redhead Murders. Throughout the mid-1980s, women with reddish or auburn hair had been discovered murdered along highways stretching from Arkansas to Kentucky, Mississippi to Tennessee. Many were strangled, many were found unclothed or partially clothed, and many remained unidentified for years. Christine Green's discovery fit the pattern. She was found along Interstate 75, her reddish-brown hair a chilling commonality with the other victims. She had been discarded in the same way, her life taken with the same cruelty. The Redhead Murders were never officially solved. Some investigators believed a long-haul truck driver was responsible, using highways as both hunting grounds and escape routes. Others suspected multiple offenders whose crimes overlapped. Christine's identification narrowed the mystery. It confirmed that at least one of the unidentified victims had a name, a family, a history. But her killer, like those of the other women, remained a shadow. For Christine's family, the identification was a gift, but it was not justice. The man or men who took her life had never faced a courtroom. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation has kept her case open, hoping that advancements in forensic genealogy might eventually point to a suspect. Samples collected from her body remain preserved, potential keys waiting for the right door to open. But decades later, time has blurred witnesses' memories, erased evidence, and closed off many leads. For now, the Green family has her name back, but not the accountability they deserve. Cold Case Archive viewers, this is why stories like Christine's matter. Technology can bring back names, but it cannot erase the years stolen from families, or the fact that killers may still walk free. If you value justice, if you believe every person deserves to be remembered, share Christine's story. Speak her name. Every voice that carries her memory makes it harder for her case to fade again. Though Christine's case remains unsolved, her identification has left a lasting mark. She is now counted among the known victims of the Redhead Murders. Her story has been added to databases, her face restored in photographs, her name spoken in memorials. Her family visits her grave, no longer anonymous, no longer marked only as unidentified female. They bring flowers, they bring prayers, they bring the knowledge that she is not forgotten. For other families of the missing, Christine's story is a beacon, proof that even after decades, answers are possible. DNA does not forget. Science, when paired with persistence, can reach across time and silence. Christine Green was only 25 years old when her life was taken. For 30 years, she was both missing and found, her body lying in Tennessee while her family searched in Pennsylvania. Her story is one of injustice, but also one of resilience. A reminder that names matter, that identities must be preserved, that no one should vanish without a trace. Her case remains open. Her killer remains unidentified. But Christine herself is no longer silent. Through DNA, through family, through remembrance, she has been brought back from the shadows. And now her name lives again, Christine Green. Every Jane Doe is a story waiting for a name. Christine's identity proves that even in the coldest of cases, there is always a chance for truth. Christine Green's name is no longer lost in a file. No longer buried under the weight of unknown female, estimated age, cause of death. Her name now stands where it should, with her family, in her community, in the records of history. But the journey doesn't stop with identification. Christine's story lingers not just as an individual tragedy, but as part of a larger tapestry of forgotten lives, unsolved mysteries, and the relentless pursuit of truth. For Christine's family, the years after her identification in 2018 were bittersweet. Monica Green, the sister who had held on to hope in small, private ways, described it as a kind of double grief. the pain of finally knowing what had happened and the sorrow of reliving the decades of not knowing. "We were right here," she told a local reporter, "living, waiting, praying. Christine was gone, and we didn't even have the chance to bury her. We lost her twice, once when she disappeared and once when we learned she had been gone all along." Her younger sister, Janelle, carried a slightly different perspective. For her, Christine's identification was a painful relief, but also a call to action. "If Christine can be found after 30 years, she explained during a vigil, then other families shouldn't give up. And we shouldn't give up on justice either. Someone out there knows what happened to her. Someone knows what happened to all those women. That, perhaps, is the unfinished chapter in Christine's story. She has her name back. She has her family's prayers answered in part. But she does not yet have full justice. The Redhead murders remain unsolved, a string of lives cut short, linked by circumstance, by region, by mystery, and now by DNA. Christine's identification has done something remarkable. It reduced the number of nameless victims within the Redhead murders. For decades, investigators had a list of women, mostly red-haired, left along highways in Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia, Arkansas. Some named, most not. Each case blurred into the next, another Jane Doe, another cold file. But in 2018, one file changed. One Jane Doe became Christine Green. The list grew smaller. The picture, though still fractured, became clearer. And in the world of cold cases, every breakthrough matters, because it means the distance to the truth has narrowed. Christine's mother, Evelyn Green, had lived with uncertainty for more than 30 years. She was known in her neighborhood for keeping a small candle burning on her porch, a vigil for her missing daughter. Over time, the candle became more than a light for Christine. It was a symbol of stubborn faith. Neighbors would see Evelyn sitting quietly beside it, her hands folded in prayer, her gaze fixed beyond the horizon. When the call came in 2018, Evelyn was frail, her health worn by decades of grief. Yet, when she was told that her daughter had been identified, she didn't cry right away. Friends recalled that she sat in her living room, a framed photograph of Christine in her lap, and whispered, "You're home now." The words carried both triumph and tragedy. The hope she had carried was answered, but at the cost of finality. Evelyn passed away not long after Christine's identification, but she did so knowing the truth. That, in itself, was a kind of justice. She had carried her daughter's memory through decades of silence and doubt, and she had lived long enough to see Christine's name restored. For Monica and Janelle, Christine's story has become a mission. They refuse to let her name vanish again into statistics or headlines that fade. At community events, they speak about her life, not just her death. Monica carries a scrapbook filled with photographs, letters, and school report cards. Janelle wears a small necklace engraved with Christine's initials, a daily reminder of the sister she lost. Together, they attend vigils for other victims. They've stood beside families of missing women, offering comfort, reminding them that silence does not mean the end. That even after decades, answers can come. "We thought Christine was lost forever," Monica told one gathering. "But we were wrong. Don't stop fighting for your loved ones. Don't stop saying their names." Their presence has become a quiet force in their community, two sisters carrying the memory of Christine, transforming grief into advocacy. Christine's identification also sent ripples through law enforcement. Tennessee investigators who had carried the Redhead murders as a haunting cold case for decades, suddenly had one less Jane Doe in their files. The forensic genealogy work done on Christine's case proved that modern science could cut through the fog of time, that cases once thought unsolvable could, in fact, be resolved. It inspired new energy. Other Jane Does linked to the Redhead murders began to receive renewed attention. If Christine could be identified, perhaps the others could too. Each new case became an opportunity, each DNA sample a potential breakthrough. Forensic genealogists explained it simply: every family tree is a map. Christine's DNA led us to her mother, her sisters, her identity. Now we apply the same tools to others. It was proof of concept, a living demonstration of what persistence and technology could achieve. Christine's case highlights a quiet revolution in criminal justice. Where once investigators had to rely on fingerprints, dental records, or the faint hope of a match in Cody's, they now have the power to trace the threads of family itself. Christine was identified not by who she was in the system, but by who she was in life. A daughter, a sister, part of a lineage that could not be erased. Think about that for a moment. For more than 30 years, Christine lay unidentified. And yet, in the end, what brought her home was the very thing that had always defined her. Her family, her roots, her bloodline. The Jane Doe project built her family tree, one cousin at a time, until the name Green appeared. And with it, Evelyn's daughter, Christine, was returned to her rightful place. This achievement was not only about science but about dignity. Every Jane Doe, every unidentified victim, is more than a case file. They are someone's Christine, someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's mother. As you've followed Christine's story, you've walked through the heartbreak of a family's long silence, the shadow of a serial killer's trail, and the triumph of DNA restoring what was lost. And now we ask you to carry that story forward. Share Christine's name. Share her legacy. Let it be a spark for awareness, for action, for remembrance. If you're watching this, you are part of Christine's legacy. Each time you speak her name, you're refusing to let her be forgotten again. Each time you share her story, you're keeping the flame alive for other victims, other families still waiting in the dark. Because justice does not end with a name. It begins with one. And so tonight, we close with the name that was once hidden, but now shines again, Christine Green. If you believe stories like Christine's deserve to be remembered, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the Cold Case Archive, and share her story so her name is never forgotten again. And tell us in the comments, what do you think it will take to finally solve the mystery of the Redhead murders? Until next time, thank you for keeping the archive alive. One story, one name, one case at a time.